We start with, hey, welcome to Spin Out, winner Dave, and we kind
I'm
of,
winner.
your winner.
Spin Out is a podcast where we're demystifying the conversations amongst GPs and LPs. I'll be representing the GP perspective as a fund CFO.
And I'll be repping the LP perspective. So, Dave, what's on today's agenda?
Well, I think we have to kind of talk about one of the big changes in venture. I've gotten a lot of questions from managers about the one big beautiful bill and some of the changes that QSBS treatment that has come out of it. Today, we're going to break down what it means for maybe your fund model, your back office team, what your LPs are expecting, and we'll kind of go back and forth and share what we think the conversations are that everyone's having.
On July 4th, happy birthday, America, the One Big Beautiful Bill, a sweeping 900-page piece of legislation, so probably written overnight, was signed into law. Touches a wide range of issues, but today we're going to focus on what matters most to your fund, especially as it relates to QSBS.
I mean, I think some of the biggest changes for the QSBS section, there are four of them that come to mind. The first is we were hoping to see a little bit more concrete understanding of how to treat safes. That unfortunately didn't come. So that's not necessarily good or bad. It's just kicking the can down the road a little bit. However, there were three changes that are very beneficial to both LPs, GPs, and founders. The first is the increase in the benefits to LPs or founders, the owners of that qualified small business. That's going from 10 million to 15 million. And in 2027 will be indexed to inflation. And so that's nice. So that will continue to increase the tax benefit through time. Also, secondary, we have a change in the threshold to the assets of the company that's being invested in, going from 50 to 75 million as an asset test to see if it qualifies. So increasing that threshold means that later round companies or later rounds can maybe still qualify for QSBS stock. And that's got a lot of implications for LPs and GPs. And then lastly, we're talking about changing the holding period of which you start to benefit from these tax advantages. So that's coming in from 5 years and it's being tranched down to 4 and 3 years with different percentages at each year, meaning you can start to get some of these benefits earlier. And that might change some of the dynamics of portfolio construction and round dynamics and give LPs and GPs different liquidity options. So all very positive for the kind of venture market and a good tailwind for us from this bill.
These are pretty major changes to the QSBS tax treatment. So when I'm talking to other LPs, especially family offices, they're not just thinking about an investment into a VC fund or investment into a startup. They're thinking about, what is the net cash on cash return for me? And so having a more tax advantageous, ecosystem here now with the changes to QSBS, like that's a positive for venture. I think we haven't really talked about what hasn't changed. So I'm just going to touch on that quickly and then I'm going to jump back to QSBS. What hasn't changed is carry, which was a big discussion during the election cycle, but that was untouched. Again, so the GP LP alignment is still there. GPs, I think, are still going to be highly motivated for long-term outcomes. That's a very positive for the venture and PE ecosystem. Another thing that was kind of discussed, especially in light with all the conversations going on with tariffs, was is there going to be a punitive tax for international LPs? And that also was shut down and not included. So that's positive for emerging managers and established managers who are fundraising internationally, which I know a lot of emerging managers are fundraising internationally. They're going to Europe and Asia and doing these fundraising trips. So there's no punitive tax on foreign LPs. So again, like that's positive, especially in light of the fundraising environment, which is very challenged. Jumping back to QSBS, there's kind of two things that Dave was touching on that I think are really attractive from the LP perspective. The first is just, how you can actually gain tax advantage earlier. So in year 3 and year 4, this is super important when you're thinking about earlier exits. There's a lot of talk about the duration of venture capital, how it's long, the liquidity of venture capital, right? Like we're in a very low point with respect to a metric that people track, which is distributions to NAV. So the amount of capital that LPs are getting back is relatively low to NAV, which is effectively illiquid. So being able to capture tax advantages earlier in years 3 and 4, we view this as very positive. And so, we're going to pass over to Dave in a second, but Dave can kind of walk you through implications for how that may affect you as an emerging manager in your back office. And then lastly, just some things to think about with this new change to the asset threshold. One, that means companies that are a little bit later, that are a little bit bigger, fall now under QSBS tax treatment, right? So if you're an LP thinking about investing into venture, right? Like you can invest even a little bit later and still get that advantageous tax treatment. And also, themes have changed in venture, especially over the last, few years, including, defense tech and deep technology and themes that companies that are a little bit more capital intensive. And so given that threshold has increased, that might be positive for some of those themes that are, I think, very aligned with the current administration and very relevant to what's being financed in today's market.
I mean, immediately when I hear you say some of those things, lights just start just flickering in my head of just one opportunities that are going to be available in the next couple of years, but then also what we need to do to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. And so I think from the GP's perspective, we have some work to do, come back to our LPs and say, all right, we now understand these changes. They do or do not impact certain parts of our prior strategy and maybe prior vintages, or they impact our current investing strategy. You've got to think through that. And so to me, if I were to break it down, I think immediately co-investment strategy, like does this change or impact my co-investment strategy now that maybe my LPs might be interested in slightly later rounds, or I might now have the opportunity to give that to my LPs as a product. So that's something I need to think through. I also now need to think through my fund model. Am I underwriting companies in a way that I think the rest of the market will now react to this? So, companies that raise large cash rounds early on, they still qualify for QSBS treatment under this. Like that now changes maybe some people's decisions about some of the rounds they participated early on in those types of cash intensive businesses. And then I also think as you're re-underwriting or figuring out what your new underwriting is, you need to make sure you got the team and like the people, process, technology to do that type of underwriting, to monitor the portfolio. And then as we're kind of seeing this like financialization of early stage VC, people need to professionalize their back office to track partial sale opportunities, like the data they need. They need to build out a network of downstream investors, secondary investors, investment bankers, maybe even lower middle market PE investors who will be looking at some of the prior, venture or prior era SaaS businesses that are growing, non-venture scale anymore. And so it's like there's lots of opportunity now, and you have to, in a very structured way, make sure you got the people, process, and technology to take advantage of it, and that you're actually doing that. And you got to build all that stuff kind of as startup founders do, like jumping off the cliff. Like it's happening now, and new funds will use this to their benefit, and incumbents have got to react. So I think there's a lot of changes from a GP's perspective. Now is the time to start thinking and start planning and to kind of ask your LPs what they're thinking too. So
Yeah,
yeah,
there's a
there's a lot to
really,
do.
really key point there you made where QSBS isn't a guarantee. Like this is something you have to actively track from the beginning to the exit and even beyond the exit when you claim it as a tax advantage. So, very important that you have kind of a buttoned up back office and you have the, proper support there to make sure you're tracking all of these investments in the right way so you can take advantage of this law. Dave, you mentioned something, really important, I think, in the pre-show, which was like setting up for success here, right? So not necessarily on the operational piece, but more on like the network piece. You want to touch on that in terms of like the Rolodex?
Yeah, I think often managers and venture come from different backgrounds, and that's a great thing, but not everybody comes with an investment banking background and a network and a known kind of understanding of how certain markets work. And so if you're one of those fund managers that doesn't have that direct experience, you need to start thinking about building it. And so a very structured way, like build out a network. Who are the best advisors in the space that you can work with and partner with? Think of them as like referral nodes, right? You need to find other GPs that maybe have had some experience here, find team members or service providers that can help you. And you got to build a Rolodex of secondary investors and investment bankers, lower middle market private equity who might be the ultimate exit for some of your portfolio companies. And it's actually taking a perspective of where might these assets ultimately land? And do I know people that can help me make that a reality? Because I don't think it's a good thing generally for a fund manager to just kind of hope it's not a that's not a strategy. You've got to actively manage, and that's what LPs are paying you for. There are ways to do it. It's just part of the business now, I think.
Thinking through this topic, what is a QSBS optimized strategy? It's important, it's an opportunity, but it's not a guarantee. So, being prepared, being properly set up, being ready for some of these partial exit opportunities in years 3 and 4, that's going to be really important for you to start thinking about in your conversations with LPs, giving LPs the confidence that you understand these new tax laws, which have great implications for how they make money and for how you're going to build out your portfolio. very, very important, right? But again, it's an opportunity. It's not a guarantee. I don't think we see, you know, a lot of capital kind of moving back into venture. Now it's been kind of a sideways market for the last 3 years. I
Yeah.
don't think this is like the magic switch that all of a sudden LPs are kind of pouring capital back into the market. I still think a lot has to do with, them seeing again the distributions relative to NAV go up. But this is a positive note. This is a very positive change in the ecosystem right now. For the audience, if you have feedback in these early episodes, please reach out. We're happy to kind of listen to your feedback, hear about topics we should be talking about, and kind of give you again the LP, GP, and CFO perspective on how to think through these to make your firms even better. I think the next conversation is going to be on how this massive influence in the market, AI financings, is changing your back office from the portfolio construction perspective. More to come.
All right, see y'all out there.